liberalized society. Apart from its academic core, sociology has for long had a profile of collaborating with welfare and development policy initiatives of the state. Thirdly, we are in the midst of enormous information overload, fake news, instant analysis, and smartly coined categories that sometimes obfuscate rather than clarify. Sociologists, like philosophers, do have the wherewithal and a history of grappling with deeper questions that this unprecedented situation demands. Events of nature and technology are mediated through the social world. They are ultimately questions about human relationships, the place of human beings in the planet, and their relationship with other animate and inanimate beings. The totality with which COVID 19 has unraveled our way of life is pushing us from one kind of TINA assumption. There is no alternative to the globalized, interconnected, technologically enabled neoliberal society that, warts and all, has still brought many benefits to many more people than before. This is one TINA. To another kind of TINA, there is no alternative but to reconsider the environmental, social, and human costs of the existing model. Let us now take up a few terms from the COVID vocabulary for discussion in the Indian context. Let's start with the obvious point, migration, which has been shaped profoundly by COVID 19, turning it into a human catastrophe. Migration is no longer an innocent word, it carries with it a great deal of trauma and tragedy. Migration is one of the major topics in sociology and demography. Migration is a constant in human evolution and has been lauded for its positive, entrepreneurial, and creative impulses. In India, internal or domestic migration was a much studied phenomenon in post independence sociology. Rural to urban migration was identified as the trigger for the major changes unfolding in the country in its social structure, cultural values, and drive for modernization after independence. Its negative consequences for haphazard urban growth and urban poverty were also much discussed. However, the life worlds of the migrants themselves were not given much attention, nor was the internal differentiation within the category of migrants. Migration out of India has been taken up more recently through the study of diaspora. In general, domestic and international migration were considered as completely separate phenomena. RC4 had the perspicacity long ago to treat them together within one platform, which is today's research committee. Now with COVID, some commonalities between the two are becoming visible, especially in the category of labor migration. Our experts on migration, Professor Khadria, who is here, and Professor Idayarajan, as well as the many webinars that the Global Research Forum for Diaspora and Transnationalism has held recently, have repeatedly pointed out that it is COVID that has really brought global attention to the vulnerability of migrant labor. A disaggregated analysis of this category reveals the fault lines of Indian society along class, race, caste, religion, gender lines. In India, soon after the March lockdown, a large number of workers in the informal or unorganized sector lost jobs. Many were migrants living in rented accommodation, shacks, and slums. With no income for food and rent, they left in large numbers for their villages, but alas, there was no transport during those first weeks. Huge groups in close proximity walked back. Many took refuge in overcrowded temporary shelters. We have heard about it in the papers and today in many of the papers as well. No social distancing was possible. Of course, migrants in large cities include those working in the organized corporate and government sector and self-employed professionals in the high-income sector. But it is the migrant workers in low-end jobs in the informal sector who are really vulnerable. The humanitarian crisis of fleeing migrants and the state's failure to anticipate and respond to it was made immediately visible by the media. It has, in a way, become the symbol of COVID. In the last 3 decades or so, the logic and thrust of globalization created a huge informal or unorganized sector in developing countries, quite different from the earlier decades. The top end, self employed, middle and upper middle class professionals consist of high income positions in the new economy. For example, in IT, hospitality, media, event management, and the like. They are mobile both in India and internationally, forming a transnational elite. But the bulk of the informal sector is in low end jobs, casual labor on daily wages with no job security. Recent studies show that migrants form a disproportionate part of our informal sector. Women also form a disproportionate part of the informal economy. Again, women form a substantial section among migrants. So, to be a woman, a migrant from a low caste or minority background in the lower end of the informal sector, that is an intersection of four marginalized positions. Of course, everyone is vulnerable to the virus to different degrees, but when policy is being made, you have to look at the most vulnerable, the bottommost section. While international migrant labor has relatively better incomes than the domestic migrant labor, it shares most of the uncertainties faced by the domestic migrant labor. In the Gulf, where Indian labor is prominent, rights are rarely available and visa status is precarious. Illegal or irregular migrants to the developed countries face the brunt of being stranded without jobs, unable to return home in the perilous circumstances of COVID. The notion of return, which was quite prominent in diaspora studies all these years, has now got a new meaning since it is not a voluntary return mostly, but a forced one, forced by circumstances. The challenge is high for the sending country of absorbing such large numbers in one go and integrating them with the domestic labor. Reactions to migrant labor are common at the best of times, and under crisis situations such as the present, xenophobia is heightened. The fear of spreading infection attached to a COVID patient often leads to an entire group being labeled. As sociologist Howard Becker says, oversimplified images get attached to this label. Such stereotyping is followed by stigma, being shunned, and harassment. While such labeling happened with socially marginalized groups like Muslims after the Markaz incident and with migrant labor when they started fleeing the city in large numbers, it is also affecting occupational groups such as vegetable vendors who are considered to be super spreaders, or even your neighbors if they are infected. So marginalized and vulnerable are not exactly the same, though there is a great deal of overlap. Marginalized communities, which is part of the title of today's webinar, are those groups who have historically been and continue to be at the receiving end of social discrimination. There is no doubt that they are at a material disadvantage to protect themselves and access medical care. Surely they are vulnerable. But there are others, individuals and groups who are also vulnerable. The COVID vocabulary stresses on vulnerability. For example, young single women from middle, lower middle, and working classes, therefore across class to some extent, are migrating alone, both within the country and outside, with skills suitable in the new economy in the last 2.5 decades. Jobs, for example, in business process outsourcing, food processing, beauty parlor, nurses, etc., with relatively better salaries compared to their home situation, and yet they suffer labor exploitation, but also sexual exploitation. And in lockdown conditions, they become more vulnerable because they are unable to move out. As I think Dr. Aparna Rayaprol mentioned in the morning, home and family have evolved as staple categories in sociology, but now it means something quite different, or it has added several meanings to it. Earlier, they were seen primarily as a safe haven, as a place of refuge with a functional division of labor. But patriarchal power structures in the family, across classes, sometimes work to disadvantage women and affect their well being, and home can become a site of abuse for girls and women. Mandatory stay at home rules, where all members of the family are with each other all day, have increased domestic violence, as many reports and studies show. The UN has described the worldwide increase in domestic abuse as a shadow pandemic alongside COVID 19. Estimatedly, domestic violence cases have increased by 20% during the lockdown, as many people are trapped at home with their abuser. Another dimension is the increased domestic labor of women across classes. The notion that they are primary caregivers at home is strong, whether they are earners or not, and whether there is COVID or no COVID. With schools, colleges, workplaces closed, and everyone at home, this causes a lot of increase in the labor burden. Organized sector women are also doing office work from home. Well, there is some hope for the future in this segment. Maybe flexi time might become acceptable to employers, and maybe men and older children will start sharing the housework after this experience, but let's wait and watch. There are also those who cannot work out of home, whose work is out there in the fields, factories, markets, and public places, and they have to use crowded public transport. There is no social distancing, so the limited comfort of the home is not available to them. Social distancing, a newly minted catchphrase, as Professor Shweta just said, initially upset many of us who saw it as a hark back to the unsavory past of intercaste and interracial separation, segregation, and untouchability. Of course, the protocol for infectious diseases for centuries the world over has been distance and segregation. It's nothing new. But the phrase, as Professor Shweta put it, it is about physical distancing and not social distancing. But the phrase has slipped into the COVID vocabulary globally. I don't think it can be taken back now. But much more worrying is that social distance is practically impossible to maintain in highly populated urban settlements in the developing world. In Mumbai, where I am from, more than 60% of the population lives in congested slums, and social distance sounds like a mockery. Again, it is not just the poor, but the lower and middle classes as well, who are affected by lack of space. The theme surfaces periodically in Bollywood movies, from Piya Ka Ghar in the 1970s to Love Per Square Foot in 2019. The situation hasn't changed. Other vulnerable categories include the very elderly, those staying alone, those with comorbidities, and single person households who have minimal social support structures. So, marginalized communities has become vulnerable groups in the COVID vocabulary. Finally, let us look at the domain of worldview, which shapes both action and policy. There are two buzzwords in this domain. One is all about getting back to normal. The discourse around this phrase expects the pandemic to be a passing phase, to be managed with some price to be paid. With a vaccine or herd immunity, the disease will eventually be conquered, as in the past with smallpox, plague, polio, and other bacteria and viruses. The underlying assumption of this perspective is that the current era of globalization, based on a neoclassical and neoliberal economy and social order, along with digital technology, has enhanced opportunities and quality of life across classes. There is only some tinkering needed to set the current problems right, and much energy is devoted to this aspect. But there is another buzzword, and that is about the new normal. What is the content of this new normal? There are various views and interpretations, including atavistic solutions rejecting change and harking back to the past. The new normal implies that we cannot escape the question of what is wrong with our system basically. How come we were caught unprepared despite scientists warning us about it for years? For any lasting solution, this viewpoint says what is needed is a robust analysis about deeper causes and how we may need to alter the way we live, also alter our own world views about what is the good life, for example. COVID 19 is different from the earlier pandemics. Apart from its natural virulence, the scale and speed of spread of corona are largely the byproducts of globalized lifestyles in which the scale, speed, and frequency of people across segments and classes traveling across the globe in an unprecedented fashion. One cynical argument is that humanity will not learn from its lessons from COVID. As before, each time an epidemic subsides, there is a falling back to the old systems and ways in which too many powerful people and interests are invested to dare to ask basic questions. Another doomsday argument is that nature is taking her revenge on humans for their thoughtlessness and ruthless exploitation. This is a colorful explanation, but there is a kernel of scientific truth that humankind is not special, but only one of the many living interdependent species in the planet. This is a truth that we have to digest. So what we may call as the new normalists, they acknowledge that COVID will change our world per force. Some talk about a new world order with a lesser role for Europe and US and the center of gravity shifting to Asia. Some predict that politically more authoritarian regimes will get popular support because fear breeds authoritarianism. The South Korean philosopher Byung Chun Han predicts that coronavirus will lead to surveillance regimes and biopolitical quarantines, reducing freedoms, bringing an end to enjoyment of the good life, and revealing a lack of humanity and mass hysteria and fear. At the societal level, the principle of social distancing may get institutionalized and may become part of our psychological DNA. The more pertinent issue, though, is how we, as a species, will need to drive this change, which is inevitable, to drive it consciously in the direction that we want towards greater resilience and sustainability. And what is the mechanism by which we will do so? Most new normalists identify the mode of globalization of the last 3 decades as the main catalyst for the pandemic and demand a shift in priorities. The environmentalist Ashok Khosla spoke last week on, are today's crises catastrophic enough for neoclassical economists and neoliberal politicians to change their mindsets? While lauding the progress and achievements post 1991, he said that it has benefited 30% of Indians, whom he calls the biosphere people, making them global citizens with income and lifestyle on par with that of the developed countries. But it has left out 70% of what he calls the ecosystem people in the cold, out in the cold. Here he says GDP is the king, and the hit and run approach to finite resources and economic and political regimes that promote endless consumption are central to this vision of growth. Let not the COVID crisis go waste, he says. Let's use the opportunity to build a just, resilient, and sustainable nation. Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Zizek questions the fashionable view that classes of the old kind have now disappeared. In this new phase of global capitalism, he avers, new modes of cooperative work with much more space for individual creativity have developed for certain segments, but they have not replaced, only outsourced the old modes to developing countries. COVID is a signal, he says, that we cannot go on the way we have till now, that a radical change is needed. Not to the old style communism, he says, but just about some kind of global organization that can control and regulate the economy as well as limit the sovereignty of nation states when needed. Yet, he and many others also stress on the need for increasing state responsibility for care, welfare, and social justice. Thus, the theme of optimum dynamics between global solidarity, international cooperation, nation state sovereignty, and market capitalism will dominate the debate on the new normal. I would like to end with a note of hope. The Black Lives Matter movement has been around for at least a decade, though it was quite specific to the US and quite muted all these years. Suddenly, the coronavirus has catalyzed new energies in the domains of action and policy, and the movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, has acquired enormous popular global currency in a way that underlines the positive role civil society can play in changing this worldview. So, to the mix of nation state, market capitalism, international global cooperation, we also add civil society to this mix. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Kamala Ganesh, for a very thought-provocative lecture.